and specifically a panel about that's titled Episodic Games, Divine Dream or Neverending Nightmare. And a big thanks goes out to everybody on the panel who's going to participate. And I thought maybe the best thing to do to start it off was just to have everybody introduce themselves. Maybe Kevin, would you mind starting?
Sure. I'm Kevin Bruner, the co-founder and president of Telltale Games.
Cool. Hi, I'm Kendall Davis. I worked as a narrative designer under Ryan Payton on Halo 4. And then after a brief little sojourn across the industry, I landed at Telltale. I recently designed episode 5 of Wolf Among Us. And now I work on Tales from the Borderlands.
Ew. Hi.
I'm Matt Gilgenbach. I'm the lead developer on Neverending Nightmares, which is a indie psychological horror game based on my mental illness, depression, and OCD. And we're in the indie mega booth, so you can stop by after the panel and give the game a try.
My name is Swery from Access Games. I came from Osaka, Japan. Sorry, my poor English. I'm a creator of Deadly Premonition. I'm making now D4 with Microsoft.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely traveled the longest distance for this, so you win that award, dude. My name is Ryan. I work on a game called République. It's also an episodic title. We just... just a brief kind of, I guess my background is, I worked on some big titles, and then we have a team here in Seattle, the Bellevue area, about 20, 25 guys working on République. And on Friday night, we hit beta on episode 3, so that was pretty exciting. This is like the most enthusiastic panel yet, so this is good. And in that vein, I think panels are really boring usually, so I really appreciate this, and I'm going to try to keep it more FM style than like NPR, like long form answers. Like if you guys want to interrupt each other, go feel free, or shout some insults or whatever, all good. It was actually also Kevin's idea that we have a little more Q&A than normal, because I think we have a lot of enthusiastic people about the types of games that these panelists have been making, or have made, or are making right now in the process of it. So I'd like to probably do a little more QA time than normal. But in the meantime, I'm just going to get to some of the questions I prepared, and hopefully it's very interesting and informative for you guys, and entertaining. So, the first thing is, and I'm going to see if anybody wants to volunteer. It would be why episodic? Like, why start with that? Why make games in the episodic format? How does that benefit you or your customer? Please.
Well, we started the company as an episodic game company, so we intended to be episodic from day one. And a big part of it was pretty self-indulgent as developers. We came out of LucasArts, and I was spending about 3 years on a game. And I'm like, 3 games a decade, that seems like not a very satisfying way to spend my time. So we way overcompensated. But it gives you a chance to experiment more. It makes I think in a lot of ways it makes the content a lot less precious. When you get to that end of that 3-year cycle, if that idea that you want isn't in that game, you have to wait another 3 years and a whole new technology and a whole new dynamic to get it in. It's just really appealing from a developer point of view. It's really hard. It's just, it's hard in its own way, but it allows you to experiment. It allows you to get to know how people are consuming the content. Have a better relationship with people like you, people who are actually playing the game. So it was just tons of upside, and we really love serialized storytelling. We're giant television junkies at Telltale, television comic junkies. So anything serialized, we just love it.
Great. Kendall, looks like you got something, dude.
Well, I can speak as a designer. Ryan, you and I worked on Halo, which is obviously huge, big budget stuff, and I think in AAA you see a tendency to emulate the big budget movies and stuff, and TV is more of a writer-driven medium, especially now. So if you really care about story and you're a designer, it seems if you want to do that career-wise, that it's really cool to work on episodic games because they do share a lot in common with TV and with the medium, and we focus, at least I can speak from my experience at Telltale, we focus a lot more on character and things that typically may be underserved in the industry, and it's really cool to work on those things. So.
Yeah, I'll butt in and basically say the reason why we chose episodic was, I think, more selfish, and I think kind of self-indulgent, like you were saying, Kevin, in a way. It helped us kind of have our cake and eat it too, in the sense that we knew we had a really big game, we had a story that we wanted to tell, but that we knew that, at least from our perspective, like in our development perspective, we couldn't spend 3 years working on the game that's self-funded / Kickstarter. And so we really looked really closely what the Telltale guys were doing. We saw that a lot of the success, especially after The Walking Dead, and we were already building a 5-chapter story, so it made a lot of sense for us. And it's just been it's been one of the best things ever for us in terms of, you get that feedback after episode 1, but it also is really important for us in terms of the development team, because it's gotten the team used to shipping. Granted, we're not shipping as quickly as I want to, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. But I can't imagine where we'd be, even if we'd be alive by this point, because I don't know even what episode we'd be working on at this moment, if we didn't have some revenue coming in, but also that learnings of actually learning how to ship and getting the tools in place. You almost kind of go through a full-on video game cycle in a very short, like a very short amount of time. And what's really interesting is, we followed the Telltale model to the T, as recommended by other developer friends in the industry, following what Kentucky Route Zero is doing. It's another 5-part, $15, $25 experience, right? Which I think is really fascinating, why both Swery and Matt have chosen to do episodic, but not like me totally rip off the Telltale model and do something that I'd love to. So for example, like on D4, it's a 3-part episodic experience, and I'd love to have you talk about it, and then maybe after that we'll hear from Matt in terms of how you're structuring your episodic game. So Swery, tell us a little bit about your episodic structure, like 3 episodes. Are you going to sell them every 2 months, every 3 months? What's the plan?
その販売について、エピソード販売についてどっちに出すか、その販売につつ、2ヶ月ずつ販売するかどっちか。
Can I speak Japanese? Sorry. 最初にエピソーディックで2ヶ月に1本ずつエピソード1、2、3を出そうと思ったんですけれども、僕の作ってる今ゲームっていうのがすごく複雑なストーリーがあるので、一つずつだとユーザーの皆さんに理解しにくいような内容になってました。それで一気にNetflixのスタイルみたいな感じで一気に3つ出すことでユーザーの皆さんに見てもらって、ある程度分かってもらってから続きを少しずつ出していくっていう風に戦略を変えました。
So he said that the game initially started off as something that they wanted to release new episodes every 1 or 2 months, but that they ran into an issue, midway through the development, hearing feedback from developers and from Microsoft that it's really hard to get familiar with the characters and get familiar with the game with just 1 episode, and so they decided to package them all together, Netflix style, and kind of doing that binge style of episodic in the way that Netflix is doing with their own original programming, which is really interesting. And Matt, that kind of is a good dovetail into what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, so we're doing a few strange and weird things, and again, a lot of it is for our own benefit as developers. So basically, we have alpha and beta access for our Kickstarter backers, and so we essentially deliver the game episodic to them. We try and get a new nightmare, because our game is sort of broken up into different nightmares, and we try and get a new nightmare every 1 or 2 months, and so that's worked pretty well. And now I think at the end of this week we'll get the final 9th nightmare in the game. But then for most people, we're just selling it as a package deal. You get all the nightmares at once, and certainly I think for a horror game, maintaining the tension is going to be kind of difficult if people have to put it down. I feel like a game like ours with the horror, you kind of want that binge experience. And also, we're doing some interesting things in that we have nightmares that are branching paths off well, there's not really a main thing, so there's different nightmares depending on what you do, and so some episodes you'll have to go back and try and find a different path to find the new nightmare episode things. So, but just from a production standpoint, we're kind of, almost all in on the episodic thing for the reasons that the other developers stated. It's really good to get it out there, get the feedback, and then, make things better.
Yeah, no, again, kind of one of the things I want to do with the talk was kind of do past, present, and future of episodic. And if we're still kind of in the first act of our panel, I really am just super curious like how Telltale came about the 5-episode structure. That seems to be more or less the norm, but I love having this kind of the diversity on our panel in terms of having like a 9-episode experience, a 3-episode experience, but love to know some kind of crazy backstory, Kevin.
It's the 5-episode structure was really arrived at because it met a lot of business agendas, I guess. We wanted a critical mass of game that would be kind of a credible retail game that could be repackaged as a retail game when it was done like a DVD set from the first series of a television show. So we needed a critical mass, and then we also wanted an individual episode price point that kind of made sense for that. So 5 episodes as $5 episodes is a $25 piece of content for the amount of running time that it was. Seemed about right. Like we like cheaper games. We think that the content is pulpy, and there's some really great $60 games out there. But we don't feel like that's what we're trying to make. We're not trying to make some giant, huge AAA $60 experience. So we want the content to be credible, and it was just $5 is a good consumable price per an episode. It makes sense when it turns into like a discounted $20 game, and we thought that was one of the things that was needed. This was very early. This was in 2004 as well, where you also want to remove some risk from people adopting it. So $20 seems it's people can spend $20. $60 makes people really consider what the value they're getting is, and when you're brand new and you're trying to prove some credibility, you want to be as inviting to people as you can. And as far as the number of episodes, that's where we arrived at it was mostly around pricing. We have played around with Jurassic Park was 4 episodes. The first season of Sam & Max was 6 episodes. We'll probably continue to play around with the number of episodes and the frequency of episodes, but we're having good success where we're at now. So,
yeah, I'll say with République, we're a 5-episode structure, and one of the things we've had a lot of success with has been the season pass. It's our attach rate for that is in the double digits, which is amazing for any kind of in-app purchase beyond the iOS right now only, but coming to future platforms soon, which is exciting. I think what we see is that players get engaged, they really like the first episode, and then they're really excited for the future episodes, and so giving them that opportunity to kind of buy in early. But a phenomenon that I've noticed, and again, sorry, this is probably more on the Telltale side, we could be kind of more heavy on that side, especially at the beginning. But another thing I'm very curious about is if they agree, or if they see this kind of phenomenon that I've witnessed anecdotally, and one of those examples being myself, as somebody who really fell in love with A Wolf Among Us, especially the first episode. Whoa, okay, I'm in. So season pass purchased, and now I set my clock or set my calendar to wait for 6 months or whatever for all the episodes to get out. And I don't check the internet. I don't read reviews on episode 3, episode 4. I just want to play it all, one night, one per night, and experience, because I have a terrible memory, and I'm not going to know what's going to happen between 2 and 3 if I play them when they first come out. And I noticed that in terms of the trends of our players, at one point we had more players who had purchased the season pass than had finished episode 1. So that told me that people are, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that they really liked the beginning of 1. They kind of stopped and figured, okay, these jerks are going to take forever to finish the sucker. I don't want to play this thing again when I forget. So hey, I'm gonna invest in this game and wait for 5 to come out and then play it in order. And I think I asked casually Kevin one point a couple months ago if that was true, but I was curious if you have any kind of things to add to that. Do you think that is my theory is true, or there's some truth to that in terms of you have a lot of your players who actually wait till 5 to actually experience the whole thing?
we definitely, when we have a season finale like we just did with Walking Dead season 2, that we'll get an uptick in sales around that time. There's definitely a weird phenomena, particularly on the PC, where I think people buy games as collectibles. Thank you Steam Summer Sale. But there's definitely a lot of people who haven't, have bought the games and just haven't played it yet. I mean, not like 90%, but a curious number. But yeah, we do get people who wait until the season. It is our goal to make that very difficult so that you have to stay way away from the internet. And we want it to be exciting to be part of the season. We think that's a really important aspect of what being involved in a Telltale series is.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep waiting, and we'll keep trying to make it harder and harder on you.
Yeah, right. It was hard, right? I was totally bought in on the series.
Overwhelmingly, people buy the season pass. On all platforms. It is easily the most popular thing. I think that's one of the things about being an episodic developer, credibility for finishing the content at a high quality level is something that is very hard earned as an episodic developer. And it's something I think if you're making episodic games, you have to take really, really seriously. So being really clear up front on we're delivering all the episodes at the same time, or what the cadence is. When we get off of our cadence, like we did between Wolf episode 1 and 2, we hear about it very, very loud and clear, and we take it very seriously. We preach reliability around the studio, but if you're going to be episodic, you have to be super credible.
Yeah, I mean, one of my edge questions, if we had time, was going to be about what's going to happen. Hopefully, never, but if a credible episodic game just the business doesn't make sense and they quit after selling a season pass, they quit at like episode 3, episode 4, and just how bad will that be? I mean, people knew that like a Kickstarter was going to fail after getting funded, and I hope that never happens to anybody, because I think that's going to hurt the credibility of like episodic as a concept. For us in the season pass, one of the reasons I think we had some success is that not only copying Telltale, but adding on top of that, we exclusive content to season pass. We offer the developer commentary only for season pass holders. We do a video, like a video documentary series that releases with each new episode that we give them exclusive access to. And then and that's all really fun, like smiley face stuff. The sad face is when we promised early access to episode 2 if you had a season pass, which I thought was a great idea, and I got Apple to say okay to that. Great, until we totally screwed up on our server side and weren't able to deliver it to our early adopters with the season pass, and that rightfully so, I think, upset a lot of our consumers. And I felt like we did what Kevin was warning against, is like making sure that you're kind of keeping the episodic structure, making sure that you're fulfilling on your promises with cadence and what just delivering on what you set out to do, because in a sense you're kind of holding on to people's money almost like a bank in a way with season pass, which is very scary. I'd love to know why 3 episodes, why 9 episodes, guys? Why 3 episodes, dude?
1つのエピソードだと短すぎて伝わらないし、5つを同時に出してしまうとユーザーの皆さんが続きを待つ楽しみが減るから、途中で切ったら3つがちょうどよかった。
Oh. So he said that it was very deliberate in the sense that with the first episode, he doesn't feel like it's enough to get the players into the world that he created, and then he also wanted to get them through the first experience. So it seemed like 3 was a little bit more appropriate than 5. And for Matt, what 9?
It was
who does 9 episodes?
It was very not deliberate. So the story goes, we had a Kickstarter, we had a budget, and we had a ship date. And we weren't quite sure of the game we were making, but we knew we wanted to keep this sort of circular, you keep waking up into these new nightmares. And so we adopted the episodic production model basically because, a lot of times when you're making a game, you try and build everything at once and get this like big picture of your game, and then you go back and polish it. The problem is, every single game developer, except for probably people at Telltale, is super bad at delivering on time. So if you do that, basically what you may end up with is an unfinished game. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to build this nightmare by nightmare, release them to our backers, get feedback, improve them. But then basically, I was shooting for 12, but there was no way it was going to happen. So in June, I told my backers, I'm like, yeah, I was shooting for 12 guys, but sorry, it's going to be 9. That's all we can do in the, given our Kickstarter budget and, the time and money we have. And fortunately, Kickstarter backers are the greatest and they're very understanding. But I mean, it's definitely not like I sat down and had my 9-episode arc or whatever. It was really just like basically building things episode by episode and then, running out of time and just figuring out how to, get everything I wanted in the game. I'm still proud of what we did, and I feel like I got everything in that I wanted to, but there was some hard sort of redesigns and smushing togethers of levels for some of the last stuff. But yeah, so totally by accident.
Well, there are also 9 levels of hell in Dante's Divine Comedy, so maybe in 100 years, someone will play Neverending Nightmare and say, oh my god,
that's
it's just
why.
like a Divine Comedy.
I was lying. That's exactly why.
Yeah, Matt, your game was totally weird.
It really is.
I played it. You gave me a beta key, which I very much appreciate. And you've talked about doing. There's obviously some content you can't experience your first time through, correct? And how why is that important to you? And then I'm going to ask Swery too, because there's actually one of the cool things he's told me about, maybe too much about D4. I didn't want to get spoiled, but he just keeps telling me things. And there's some really exciting things about what happens if you play the game, numerous times. And that's something that I think we struggle with at Camouflaj on République. Just as a quick side note, I think we're a little more gameplay focused than some other episodic games. And we have New Game Plus, right? So you can go through the experience again and start collecting more things. And we have lots of side missions and all sorts of stuff to keep people engaged. But on the other side, I'm wondering why we even do that, because you're just lucky if you get somebody to play your game through once. I doubt Kevin's going to share the percentage, but I'm assuming that Telltale games have a very high completion rate, whereas I bet it's going to be a lot higher than a game that like ours, where we really challenge players. There's straight up for better or for worse, kind of like a game over scenario where people just get stuck and they give up and it's too hard. But yeah, so that's about République. But let's talk about. Maybe start with Matt and then maybe end with Swery in terms of replayability. Why do you feel that's important, knowing that probably most of your customers aren't going to play the thing a second time?
Well, I think part of it is just sort of one of the design goals is, since it's mostly about the nightmares, and because the nightmares are sort of mirroring my feelings dealing with mental illness, OCD, and depression. And so I wanted the idea that with the branching narrative, that there's a bunch of different endings that are completely contradictory. So the actual reality the character wakes up in is not the point of the game. It doesn't really matter. There's no right way, or there's no real way to figure it out for sure, because I want people to sort of go back into and think about the feelings expressed for the nightmares. So certainly that was part of it, but also I feel like pacing in a horror, a piece of horror work is very challenging. And so to some extent, we're sort of emulating the model of a movie. So one playthrough to the end is 90 minutes to 2 hours. But then if we make a game that's 90 minutes to 2 hours, people are going to complain that we're charging $15 for it. So we thought it'd be kind of neat to, add in these branching things. So I mean, if you wanted, you can start, from the beginning and play through to these other endings. And certainly we had, a lot of delusions of grandeur about how many choices we'd have, and 12 nightmares, 20 nightmares. But I mean, even still, we were able to add probably another 1 to 2 hours of content, which I think puts us better in better shape for the price we're charging, but also it keeps the pacing and the tension, in sort of a manageable or understandable way. I mean, certainly there's long horror games, and they do a lot of things where, it's tense and then release, you're in the other world, you're in the regular world. But I wanted it to mirror my experience with mental illness, where shit just keeps getting worse, right? And so that's sort of why we chose a shorter, path to the end, but then also additional content if you go back and play.
All right, Swery. So, what's going on with your second playthroughs? And there's mainline content. There's also side content. Maybe would you mind sharing with the audience, what's in D4 a little bit and why?
D4 はかなり多くのサイドコンテンツを持ってるんですけども、それを用意している一番大きな理由は、僕がゲームを作るのが遅いからいろんな人を待たせることに多分なると思うので、その待ってもらうためにそこを待っててくださいねっていうメッセージもこもってます。で、途中でその待ってもらう間にサイドコンテンツっていうのは結構よくできたツールというか、それを遊んでいる間にユーザーの皆さんはキャラクターのこととか D4 のゲームのことが好きになっていくような仕掛けが入ってます。でそれで好きになってくれればキャラクターをもっと知るし、好きになってるから待ってくれるっていうサイクルが生まれるから、そういう意味では待たせながらもゲームを好きになってもらうために必要だと僕は思ってます。
Yeah, it's interesting. So he basically said that for them, he really wanted to give them a lot of content, even side content, to almost as like an apology for making them wait so long for the game, and also in terms of the getting more familiar with the characters. A lot of their side content, there's a lot of it in the game, and it lets you basically investigate more about these different characters that you might have interest in, to keep you invested in these characters and keep you playing as you're waiting for the next episode. At least that was the idea to start.
例えば D4 ではそのサイドクエストじゃないですけども、そのヒゲを交換できる要素があって30種類ぐらいのヒゲを集めたりとかっていうそういう要素が入ってますね。
So one way to keep people engaged is one of the features that he's announcing right now in D4 is that there is 30 types of facial hair in D4, and you could collect this facial hair through the main mission, but also through side quests. So it'll keep you engaged for a lot of time. So
Ryan?
Yes, sir.
And kind of on the opposite side, when we talk about replayability, I know because we talk a lot about storytelling in general. For me, some of my favorite films was like Inception or Memento, and I just saw this film, Enemy, with Jake Gyllenhaal. It has an insane ending. It is, it's an insane ending, but the thing about endings, when they're really, really good, is that they kind of cast the work of art in a new light. And, with Wolf, episode 5, we definitely thought a lot about that, and some of the cool stuff that we can do with story-driven games is, there's story-driven games, right? So there's a story and then there's a game, right? And so there's the collecting content, there's part of that, but then there's also eventually we just want to really hit players emotionally, right? We want to have something that's in your head for, days or even weeks afterward where you're like, man, I need to go back and play it, I need to go back and see it, because I know for me, some of my favorite games, the game that got me into the industry was Halo. It's I thought about it when I was in high school, all the time, you're just thinking about these things, or whether it's Knights of the Republic, or I know for me when I track any of my favorite games, or even Metal Gear Solid 4, right?
That's how he got the job.
But they live in your imagination. One of my old mentors always says that the best game designer and the best game engine ever made is the player's imagination. And if you can tap that, then people will want to come back to your content, and I think it's always important to not lose sight of that, especially with story-driven games.
All right, yeah, let's cut the crap, guys. Episode 1 and episode 5 are by far the most important episodes, true or false? Or the first and the last, I should say.
Yes. Yeah. Any good story, the beginning and the end matter a lot. But I think if you went straight from episode 1 to episode 5, there would be a little something missing.
Right, for sure. And I'm glad you said yes, because like that's my mantra of the team for like 3 years. So if you said no, my team would be like probably not there on Tuesday. When we get back to the office.
Episode 2 is the most important one.
Oh man, well, but yeah, the reason why at least my thinking is that, I mean, obviously you don't want to ship terrible episodes 2, 3, and 4, but that if one is amazing and compelling, people are going to come in there and they're going to want more. And as long as you're satisfying them with 2, 3, and 4, but I think like you go nuclear in episodic, at least in my opinion, with having not even shipped an episode 5 in my life, mind you, is that if 5 is so amazing that it compels people to go through the experience, buy the season pass, and even endure some stuff about the game that they may not like, I think that's when you win. And so that's why with episode 5 of République, it's probably going to destroy the studio in terms of my aims and ambitions to try to get people as excited as possible about the experience.
Well, 2, 3, and 4 have a lot of work to do,
They do.
to make 5. Like you designed a 5, so you can speak to.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a story can't be separated into like its modular parts. So, there's an ending with 5 that, that is pretty exciting and builds to a really cool finish. And this is also something that, we were talking about in terms of, some these things come out, right? And they're kind of like mini events. They're reviewed by publications as games in their own right, in terms of like, this has got a review score, right? And it's pretty much like, should you buy it, should you not, right? But it's like, there are parts of like, one of my favorite books growing up, like Harry Potter, right? There are like some parts, especially like Order of the Phoenix, that, take a little bit of work to get through, right? But it's all part of the journey. Even the parts that you didn't necessarily like or resonate with, they're all part of your experience. It's like a story or work of art is not necessarily a thing that you can just like separate, right? Even like the parts where you kind of felt that you went into a valley, right? Those are directly responsible for the peaks, right? And I think it's understanding that like maybe in episode 3 and episode 4's job is to plant things with the character, right? And even like in terms of it's not like Fables, it's even like a line of dialogue, right? That's so important for players who are observant, for when you get to 5, right? That those things wind up paying off.
So you're my best friend because you just set up my next question, which is how much, where do you draw the line in terms of going back and fixing content? And you guys can probably imagine what I'm going with this. It's like, in general, I think we know, for example, on our game, I think we know where we're going to go with episode 5. But to set up that big payoff, partly for reasons of actors' schedules, we had some content that we wanted in episode 2 that we couldn't record until episode 3. And so I'm not sure if this is even in the build or not. Illustrious designer Nathan Scott would know. He was sitting in the front seat, whether he's implemented it or not. But when we ship episode 3, there might be one piece of content that we recorded during episode 3 that will appear in episode 2, which sucks for players who've already finished through episode 2, obviously. But to develop this character, and that is walking a very fine line in terms of retconning, I'll admit. But I'd love to know in terms of like what Matt and Swery's ambitions are with in terms of like previous content and as they're making it. But also from Telltale's perspective in terms of what's off limits in terms of as you're developing new content when you go back and fix things.
So at least for us, since we're not, like sort of publicly episodic, we're mostly delivering episodes to, alpha and beta backers. We go back and change things, and this month we're probably going to replace like half the art in the first episode because, as we continued to develop, we got a better handle and understanding on our art style, and then the old content looks really bad, so we're going to go in and replace it. And certainly since we're, obviously we have quite a few people playing the current version, but I imagine a lot of people just for, sort of a horror-themed game and sort of almost, we do want people to binge. So most people get the binge experience and, not notice or not be aware that we went back and added in staircases, because it felt really bad without staircases, but it took forever to get all the animations and the code to do the staircase behavior, and there's a lot of things, and now we're going back and adding, some more scares and some more interactive objects in earlier levels.
And
because
your Kickstarter backers are cool with it because they get to see the development. I'm
oh
assuming,
yeah,
right?
they love it because they play through it, and then every time it gets better. And like for a while the voice acting was done by me and my wife, and then all of a sudden in our last build we have like professionals, and it sounds way better. And so it's a cool experience for them. But I mean, just I don't know. I worry if I were actually, trying to sell something episodically, that I would just keep going and meddling, and I would George Lucas all of my earlier stuff. So
already in the process. Yeah. Gentlemen, Telltale guys, anything?
Well, we've never gone and revisited old content, but I think one of the things we do is we develop very live. So we generally don't have the next episode done when the episode is in the market. And we have a back-end system that allows us to monitor the telemetry for how people are playing. And the best anecdote of kind of the way we react to making the game better is how many people played Walking Dead Season 1? Okay, good, a good number. So you remember Ben? So we had it. Yeah. So when we design a season, we have a big writing room at the beginning, and we kind of know where we're going. We don't always follow that path. We give us the flexibility. But we knew what was going to happen to Ben in episode 4, which I'm going to say some spoilers here, but a lot of hands up. But we knew what was going to happen to Ben, and that Ben's life was going to hang in the balance, and we wanted that to be a difficult decision for the player. But we realized by looking at the telemetry data on episode 2, when we were working on episode 3, that people really dug Ben. They liked him. Ben was supposed to be kind of this clumsy kid who would cause problems and be a kind of a liability for the group, and we wanted you to have to debate that. But it was very apparent to us from the feedback from episode 2, from the telemetry and the anecdotal feedback on forums, but the hard data, everybody was choosing choices that were like, Ben, no problem. Like, you didn't mean anything by that. So we amped it up. We modified episode 3 late in production to make Ben a little bit more of a liability. He would throw Clem in front of danger and make dumb decisions. And then episode 3 came out, and we looked at the data, and Ben was just, I guess he was too nice of a guy, too pathetic. Like everybody, like Ben could do no wrong. He just, right? So now we got a serious problem. And so we're in episode 4, and we're like, what are we gonna do? And you'll notice when you play the game, right before you leave on the mission where Ben's life hangs in the balance, Ben has this speech where he throws everything we could possibly think of. Like, Lee and Clem aren't a real family. You're not her real dad. Everything horrible we could imagine that Ben would say to get the needle to move where people are like, screw this guy. Let him get, right? And then we got closer to the results, that kind of 50-50, and that everybody taking the maximum amount of time to make that decision. So we got a little closer there, but we were kind of hitting the edge where that wasn't going to be a very compelling moment for people. So rather than kind of retroactively going back by working episodically, working on kind of the bleeding edge, we can monitor that stuff and react to it. I think if we indulged ourselves, we would probably get a little George Lucas-y and go back and make some changes. But we've got a lot of stuff in front of us.
We just use numbers to punch you in the stomach.
Yeah, no looking back.
That's awesome. That was a cool story.
Ryan, kind of like a philosophical note on that is like, it's not just something that games deal with. It's like David Chase, the creator of Sopranos, recently, he basically gave, the Sopranos ends with a big cliffhanger, and then now all of a sudden he gave his idea of what exactly happened. And the interesting thing is, on a bunch of the forums on Slashfilm, people were talking about no, he can't do that because it's ours now, right? And once something comes, it's like what Matt's doing is right, in alpha and beta, there's kind of this, it's like the sculpture process, right? But then once it goes out, it's it's there, right? And that's why, you know, like the Lucas example, right? People feel like their sculpture has been vandalized sometimes because it's like, it's mine now, right? And it's like, I've emotionally attached to it, so it's like definitely a very fine line.
So you're not going to tell us what the ending of Wolf Among Us means?
What do you think happened?
It was very, very, I think, very effective ending. It was very well crafted. A quick note on our side, I guess, is that I look at it as up until episode 5, I think we can change some stuff. Like, really try not to touch any story stuff, but it's actually we're just adding features, which I think is pretty cool. With episode 1, people complained about not having a map, so we built a 3D map that players could use, and we retroactively added that to 1. So, but yeah, so I love this idea that we're kind of building more features and making the game better, more performant, better frame rate, all that kind of stuff as we're going on, as we're getting better as developers, which is really exciting. Swery, I think you might have something to add in terms of going back and fixing. D4 comes out, you're going to look at reviews. Are you going to go back and like George Lucas us to all hell?
D4 の場合は他の皆さんのタイトルと少し違ってミステリーです。 D4 はミステリーだから最後まで謎を続けなきゃならなくて、でもその謎が解決した時に、伏線って分かる、ヒントがないといけないからたくさんヒントを入れておかないといけない。でもそれで犯人を変えてしまったらフィードバックでその伏線ヒントはどうするのっていう問題があって、本当は変えられないんだけどそこは例えばサイドクエストで回収したりとかっていういろんなアイデアを今温めていて、みんなのフィードバックには対応できるように考えてる。だけどあまりフィードバックを送られるとその僕はそのわがままだからみんなの思ってるのと違う風に作っちゃうからそれはあまりおとなしくしてね。
Yeah, so that's really fascinating. For this first season of D4, there's a lot of hints at the end because the game's a big mystery. And it's important for him to put a lot of hints in there for players to start creating their own theories about what's going to happen. And in a way, he really wants people to be very vocal about the different theories about what's going to go happen next. And it's actually open-ended enough for the developers in Osaka to change, potentially future content based on how the community is responding, similar to what you described with Ben in Walking Dead. But that said, Swery is also a very selfish creator in his own words, and says that you guys could be you might be best to just be quiet because at the end of the day, he's going to take the story where he wants to take it. But I think it's a very interesting balance right there, right?
Well, I think one other thing is especially in the mobile marketplace, people expect games as a service. When we released Retrograde on PC, I'm like, I've worked on this for 4.5 years, and people are like, here are the features that you need to add in your next version of Retrograde, and I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. But I mean, like in the mobile marketplace, it's you expect those app updates, and if you tell Ryan this needs a minimap, I think there are some expectations that he's going to go and put in a minimap in, and for a narrative-driven game, especially an episodic narrative-driven game, that's kind of some hard choices, and certainly I don't fault you for adding features.
Well, it's the games as a service. Like especially if you buy the season pass, like damn, we want to take care of you. My last question before we get to Q&A. So be thinking about some good questions, guys. I'm going to take the mic back. Just kidding. Is how do you? I'm just really curious about this, especially on the Telltale side. Something that I don't think we do very good as a company because we're so busy and we're relatively small. In terms of just building the next game, building the next episode, there's no time for us to basically kind of drive engagement. We don't have like a big social team or marketing team, or we don't have a forum and all these different things. And there are some small things I think we could do, but I think it's probably everybody would agree it's important to keep engagement in between episodes. I'd love to hear from the Telltale guys like how they do that, and also maybe from Swery and Matt in terms of how you guys are planning on keeping engagement going through in your stories.
We have experimented with a lot of different stuff over the years, going from a small company to now we are a big company, so we have a marketing team and the things that you described. But I think the most successful thing we've done are the stats at the end of every episode. So it's I think with serialized entertainment like on television, you come in on Monday morning after watching Game of Thrones on Sunday night, and everyone's talking about what happened. And we wanted to inspire that with when people play our games. So those stats at the end kind of ground the conversation. They kind of seed what we expect people to talk about. So when you finish Walking Dead, you can look at the stats and ask your friend, did you do the same thing I did? Because it seemed like nobody, only 20% of the people did that. So it starts the conversation from a grounded place. And I think that's different than what you can do with like a GTA or a big open world game, where you can share your experience with your friends about, hey, I just bought GTA, what did you do? And they're very disparate. Whereas we like that water cooler effect, and we try to build forums for it. We've tried a lot of different things over the years, but the stats at the end of it are really cool. And one of the features, Games as Service, that we'll be adding for people who have a Telltale profile is that you can get more stats by linking your game, so you don't just see those 5 things that we called out, but you can go and dig deeper into your episode and see more interesting things and compare against your friends. And those are kind of features that'll be coming up in Borderlands and in Game of Thrones.
Oh, cool.
Well, we have.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt Matt real quick. If you have a question, you might as well start getting lined up, and then we'll let Matt and Swery talk about. Everybody's standing up. It's standing room only. All of a sudden.
We have a really tiny team, like 4 full-time people, but I think especially because we did a Kickstarter, engaging with the community and keeping them interested and involved over the process, because we took their money, before we had much to show for it, so I really try to have a lot of visibility, and we do have forums, and I check them like every day, except for, now when I'm at PAX and I have no time, but I really try and check them religiously, and we do weekly updates to Kickstarter, and so we really do try and engage with the community and keep them excited about the game. So it's definitely important to us, and something that I budget for in my very busy days.
All right, so I just talked to Swery, and he said this is all really good feedback for him that he's going to take back to Osaka. So this is like, he's going to be applying a lot of these learnings. And so let's just get straight to the Q&A. My only request is that because there's a lot of people lined up, that you keep your questions pretty short, and then we'll try to keep our answers very short so we could just get to as much content. I think that's the most fun.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Hello? Yeah. Whereas Walking Dead was mostly character-driven, and then you were able to do the Walking Dead Telltale story. Borderlands is very action-based while it has comedy elements. Did you find that transition weird at all? Did Borderlands approach you, or did you approach them? I just want to know how that came about. And
well, the relationship, we approached one another at 2 years ago at the VGX Awards, where Gearbox was up for a bunch of stuff and Telltale was up for a bunch of awards. I like to say we got really drunk at the after party and nobody really remembers what happened, but 9 months later this project came out. I think Kendall can talk a little bit about how we're approaching the design.
Yeah, well, what Telltale does well, and I think what its legacy is in the industry is, as you said, character-driven. And Borderlands is a world, right, that obviously has its own particularities and stuff, but that doesn't stop us from being bold and thinking through, like, what is the serious, grounded character stakes in this world. And I think that's the approach that we try to do to any IP, and our content that's successful, even episode to episode, is when we really double down on the characters and really get through their journey. So that's exactly what we're bringing to Borderlands too.
Great. All right, take Geek Guy.
Fake Geek Guy.
Fake Geek Guy. Geek Guy, I can't read.
So yeah, first of all, I wanted to thank you for Monkey Island and Sam & Max, because it was like...
Thank you for keeping it alive. And
yeah, I just felt like you brought the best of the adventure games into them without all of the crappy, ridiculous puzzles that no one can solve.
Well, that's one of, we're grounded in adventure games, and one of the things when we started was very much, I loved adventure games as a kid growing up, text adventures and graphic adventures, and I would try to turn my friends onto it and be like, you gotta play this game, it's super awesome. And you'd sit them in front of it and say, what do you do? Click, and the character would walk and then just stand there, right? So we're pretty frank with each other around Telltale. Telltale's kind of mecca for adventure games. And but we're pretty honest with like everything that sucks about adventure games, and we've been not just trying to make them tolerable. We want to make them first class, the best thing, and we take a lot of pride in Walking Dead winning Game of the Year from a couple of places, and but really trying to make adventure games not this fine wine that only elite people in the video games world understand. Just make it really kind of consumable and first run entertainment.
Okay, and then my actual question was, will there be more Sam & Max and Monkey Island, or is that?
So Monkey Island is owned by Disney now after buying Lucas.
Okay.
So we can't speak to anything Monkey Island, and Sam & Max still make appearances in our Poker Night series. And we don't have anything to talk about with Sam & Max right now, but we are still very much in love with Sam & Max. We work very closely with Steve Purcell. So.
All right, and thank you again. I just really appreciate it. It's nice to see it as a fun medium again.
Hi there. I can't really say much for Matt's title or for Swery's D4 because I don't know very much about them. It sounds like what Matt is doing with his game is is closer to what I was going to ask, which is you were saying you were trying to get to the heart of adventure games and like make the parts that aren't as good better and take out the things that people were frustrated with. And me personally, I always felt like I was very locked into adventure games. I was not necessarily linear, but very mono or bi-directional. And I was wondering if you planned on doing any sort of more experimental kind of title where people's decisions have larger effects on the story, where they can go into much vastly different kinds of paths, where you spend lots and lots of times working on different parts of the game that people won't necessarily see, to give them incentive to play it a completely different way, instead of eventually seeing roughly the same sort of ending unless you just play like the last 5 minutes again.
We have an R&D group at Telltale that is working on making stories more dynamic. One of the things that we struggle with is we're pretty committed to telling great stories. We have a large writing staff, and by it's difficult for us to make a great story if we let you go left, right, and go wherever you want. Like, there might be some paths that tell great stories and some paths that tell not so great stories. So we specifically call what we do tailored narrative. We like the shared experience. We like the personalization. It's more like if a great storyteller were telling you a story and then telling the next person the same story, they might tell it a little differently, reacting to the way you're consuming the story, but they're basically telling the same story. And until we get some technology that we can bring to market that allows more dynamic stuff than that, that's kind of where we're going. So we want the games to be more dynamic, to be more adaptive, to understand who the person on the other side of the screen is better. But our standards are we have to tell awesome stories. And as we can push technology to open that up so we can tell more diverse, awesome stories, we will do that. But the bar for us is it's got to feel like a brilliantly told story.
I think also there are two things there, right? One is, even if a group of writers could write that much content, we could figure that out, then there's also the realities of the producibility of that amount of content, right? So I feel like that actually more so, I mean, writers can do a lot when they're faced with a deadline, but it's, as tools become better for allowing teams to generate large, like super large amounts of content, I think that's the technological hurdle that kind of stands in the way of what you desire.
Because we're generating a lot of content that people won't see. A lot of people may not see, and it's kind of a scary from that perspective. Like, we put all this great stuff in that people might not see, but since we did a Kickstarter, we wanted to do something really new. We wanted to push boundaries on interactive narrative, and then also we structured it in a way such that I can kind of like cheat a lot, because basically every time you wake up from a nightmare, the reality in and of itself can be redefined, and it often is. So basically we can have things that maybe don't quite lead to the same, or that lead to the same path, that maybe don't mesh up super well. But since, it's a nightmare and everything is rebooting, it gives us a lot of room to play with the narrative and to build these blocks and combine them in different ways. So it's definitely very challenging from both a production and content standpoint and, writing and making everything cohesive and cool. And so that's why we're kind of cheating.
Cool. That was a good question. Thank you. We got about 7 minutes left, so we're going to have to go a little more rapid fire.
All right.